in April, and there might be funds that are showing up as unexpected expenses. And so this is what we're going to learn about today, is what do you do in that case, and what are the processes of getting approval when there's spending that you don't anticipate. So the first part of the SBDC award is that you need to always make sure to have prior approval. And that means that you need to be in touch with me before you spend the funds to sort of let me know what's happening, why there's been a change in the original plan, and make sure that the expenses are allowable and how they're going to impact your overall budget, and how we're going to go forward and make sure that the big picture is still going to be going forward towards your key objectives. And so prior approval, according to the award, is that any budget revision, including cumulative transfers among direct cost categories or among separately budgeted programs, projects, functions, or activities, shall not exceed 10% of any cost category. The prior written approval of the lead center is required for any transfers that exceed 10% and constitute a change of more than $2,000. To do this, the subrecipient, which are the service centers, must submit a letter of request with justification to the lead center prior to expending any of the funds involved. And so this can be, an email exchange or anything like that, and we both keep a copy. I just have an electronic folder in my files, and when it comes time to do budget modifications, then I have that correspondence, and I look at that correspondence and ensure that the changes we've discussed over the year are included in the budget modification that's submitted, and that the expenditures that have happened throughout the year are now included in the budget modification, that everything is lined up by the time we're getting into the fall and we're looking towards closing out the grant. So examples of items that require prior approval: travel outside of our region, and this confuses people because sometimes it's considered outside of our state or outside of our region. That term can be used back and forth. The reason is because California and Texas, because of their large geography and population, are the only two states in the nation that have separate regions. If you lived in Oregon or Nevada or any other state besides those two, you would just have one state SBDC lead center that might be run out of the governor's office. And so if you traveled outside of your state, that would be the case. But in California and Texas, we have to sort of specify that region and state are one and the same when people in Washington, D.C. are looking down on us and thinking about their budget planning. So you have to kind of think of their perspective. Hiring a new service center director. So if someone is retiring, this happened with Mendocino recently, so then that host organization, which is a board of directors, needs to be in contact with the lead center and needs to get prior approval before officially hiring a new center director. Other reasons to complete the budget modification process. The federal award amount is anticipated to increase or decrease. And so this can happen. I think several of the centers are participating in programs this year around like EDD funds, for example, that there will be an increase in funding at the end of the year. And so then we'll need to do budget modifications to add funds. Or if you realize that there's other grants that that you've ended up spending down instead of the SBDC funds. This happens with some centers where they have other federal funding or other grants that become a priority and they aren't able to spend down all of their SBDC funds. We need to know that so that those funds can be utilized by a different county in our region and they don't have to be given back to Washington, D.C. so that our region can still take advantage of them. When total indirect costs, which are reimbursed with federal funds, or non-federal waived indirect costs increase. And so this is a tricky one that if there's any amount, even $1 over in reimbursed federal indirect or the waived indirect, we need to show that change, and SBA is really picky about that. So it seems kind of ridiculous sometimes that it can be such a small change, but if there's any increase, they need to be notified. Budget changes are expected to exceed 10% of the total approved budget in any cost category. And so those would be the total personnel or total fringe, travel, across the total of all sources of the federal SBA funds and the match funding. Program income is not part of this equation. So if you are to look at your SBDC budget that comes out with your grant, there's not a funding column for program income in that. And the reason for that, I guess, is because when SBDC is looking at their budget, they're trying to say, if we give you $100,000, we want to make sure that you have $100,000 in match. And those are the two important pieces to them. They still want to make sure that you're tracking program income, but they're most concerned about that match piece. And spending is anticipated in a cost category fund budget. So that if you didn't expect to have any expenses in travel, then you decided that, oh, we actually are going to be traveling, or you didn't expect contractual, for example. That would be probably a more likely one, that you didn't expect to hire anyone to help with a website or do something like that, and then you realized that you really did need to have someone do that. So then you would need to get prior approval to have funding in a $0 category that you hadn't had a budget for. The budget modification timelines. So October 1st, the lead center sends out a template and instructions. October 15th, the service centers submit drafts of the modification for the lead center's review. And then at the 30th, the service center submits a final version of the budget modification signed by the host organization. And so those are the service center timelines, and those timelines are because we're going to need to, at the lead center, review all of those budget modifications, and in November, we're going to be issuing formal contract modifications to the service center hosts so that they can close out the year in a timely manner through December.
Hey, Sean, can I interrupt for a second?
Oh, sure.
It looks like Kelly has a question, and then Layla had a question about the budget mods, if unexpected revenue would warrant a budget mod.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so let me get through this piece. Thank you for paying attention to that while I'm talking.
Yeah.
And so let me get through this piece and then I will go back and look at that. So in November, we will initiate the formal contract modifications, and then at the lead center, we will also be doing a roll-up of all the different budget changes and seeing if we need to submit a regional modification to Washington. And we have these same rules that we follow through with, or that we kind of push down to the service centers. And we need to see if we need to submit a formal modification to Washington, and that is due by December 1st. So those are all the timelines that we're dealing with and how that works. So, all right, and so looking at questions, let's see. Let's see, budget modifications. Okay, so Layla, yes, for revenue, if you do expect that you're going to have additional cash match, I mean, I think that's probably what you're thinking, Layla, and if there's something additional, please let me know. But if you're going to have additional cash match, yes, we would do that in the budget modification as well, as we would reflect that. And that most likely would mean that you're going to be doing more spending. I mean, the budget modification is about spending. So it's usually if you have more revenue coming in, you would be doing more spending. That might not always be the case, but whatever amount of additional spending that you plan on doing in the year is what you would be reflecting in your budget modification. And let's see, other questions. Okay, I think is that it? Okay. All right, so the parts of the budget modification are, there's a cover sheet, and we'll go through and look at this together. And it has the host information that we're going to be issuing the new contract to. It's very similar to the proposal when we looked at that packet. The detailed budget, and that's similar to the proposal packet as well. And the budget narrative, and then a waived indirect calculator, which auto-calculates, and that is it. So let me switch screens and get over to the template, and we will look at that. Okay, is this showing up for people? Want to verify that you guys are able to see the budget modification info?
Yeah, that looks good to me.
Okay, thank you, Errol. Okay, so the first page is just some reminders and some instructions, and it has a brief overview of things we went over, that the federal award amount, if it's anticipated to increase or decrease, we need to have a budget modification. If the total indirect changes, or increases, we need to have a budget modification, and the 10% rule. And then giving some examples of how you would do the budget narrative write-up. So starting on line 8, it's talking about, on the budget narrative form, you would list a brief description for any category a transfer is being made. And so it'd be both a to and a from, and put the amount and the source of funds column. And so it's giving an example that for a personnel category, you could say in the narrative that you're transferring out unused labor costs to the consultants category. And then in the consultant narrative, you could say transfer in budget for additional consulting costs. And so that's how you would do that. And you could also put some additional wording that would say some reasons that there was a delay in hiring an assistant as an example, and that the salary savings is being used to hire consultants and provide client services. And so then in line 28, it's saying where you would send the file to and when it's due. And then if you have questions, you can contact me. So looking on tab A is the cover sheet, and you'll recognize this from looking at the proposals that we looked at last time. So you would fill in anything that's in the blue area, and if you just start typing and you do this in order, it'll start auto-filling for you. So name of the host organization, that's who the contract is going to be issued to, the mailing address, the host contact person, and then you'll come down to the service center and the service center contact information and the director's name. And then to the name of the authorized official. And so just as an example, if this was a hosted center, like let's say North Coast, that's hosted by Humboldt State University, then the authorized signature would be Stephen Karp. And so, and the name of the SBDC director would be Layla Roberts. And so I'm gonna think, let's see, and then we'd have the director here, and you can type in anything you need to in the blue spaces. And you would put the 12-month salary here. And remember that the 12-month salary, there's a little reminder that it's the full-time equivalent for all positions. So let's say that there's a couple centers where there's sort of a split directorship, where there's someone who's a dean that has 20% of their time as the director, and then there's a business services director that does sort of the day-to-day management of the SBDC advisors, et cetera. And so if you had a portion of a dean's salary listed here, you would still put 100% of what that person makes. And I'm just, to make my life easy, I'm going to just put $100,000 for the purpose of math. And then if it was 20% SBDC time, and then you could say that $10,000 is being paid out of the SBA funds, and $10,000 is being paid out of the local cash match, and that's going to add up to $20,000. And then there's a little check over here too in column N, that if I ended up putting in $2,000 here, just so it's telling me that this total in column M right here and N are not matching. So 12,000 and 20,000 are not the same. So it's a little hint that there's a problem. I'll change this back to. And then for fringe expenses, you can do this a couple different ways. That you can list the, most of the centers do it where they list it by the position. And so that the director might have a fringe rate of probably more like 35% or something, and the admin assistant could have even 50%. But if you do need this template to be changed to having it say the breakdown per benefit, where it says Social Security versus vision versus medical, et cetera, that would be okay as well. So That's how we do it at HSU. So then you've got the mileage, and the mileage for this year is 0.535. And then you can put down your in-state, how many region meetings you'll be attending and how many people will be attending those. If you're going to the national conference, and a breakdown of expenses. And then contractual. And so this will be changed for this year when it comes out, but contractual would be something like website design, or maybe advertising or something like that. But it wouldn't be anything to do with business consulting. Business consulting is always going to be under line G. And so anything to do with client services would be under line G. And then these are just example categories. They could be meetings and professional development, memberships, anything that's not in the categories above, basically. And your office expenses, if you have to pay rent, would come down here. If you don't pay rent, and then we can capture those expenses in the in-kind area. So if your host donates those expenses, we can do a market rate comparison and declare that as a donation, which is helpful. So then this is where there's an explanation of what the expenses are and if we're moving money around. So if it's moving, $5,000 from the original budget from the director's salary to consulting because there was a delay in hiring a new director or something like that. And then you don't really have to do anything with this. It's just an auto-calculated waived indirect sheet, and it will fill in on this detailed budget right here. So those are all the pieces. So, and this is what will get sent back to the lead center, and then we'll kind of give some information back to you, and then you can get it signed off by your host. And where you do that is on the cover sheet. And so then that'll get submitted, and we'll know that we're all in agreement, your host, your service center, and the lead center, that we're going forward and issuing a new contract for the year-end closeout. So I hope that makes sense. Are there any questions about that? Okay, and Kelly, you're asking, so even if we submitted a budget that is already very different to our expenses, so we wait to do the modification. I mean, if there's a certain situation, I mean, we need to be in contact about your, we need to get prior approval of your expenses. So if there's changes. And so I know in your situation that I was notified that there was one change that was around $1,200. And but if there's other changes, then we should discuss it and kind of see what the go forward is. Anything else? No, and the other thing too, just kind of a comment of how I manage this is that when I'm making changes, like I was using Kelly as an example, that I was in contact with her finance director recently that they were going to move $1,200 from one category to another. And so I think it would probably be helpful in that instance to make that change. You could have a working budget at your center that you just make that change when it's approved and keep a folder with that documentation. And it's just kind of this working document all year long. And I mean, if you see this budget template, it looks exactly like your proposal template. And if you want this ahead of time, or I mean, you might have it if you've been working for the SBDC for a while, that it would be in your files. But you can just keep it going during the year and making updates and revisions, and then you're not starting from scratch in October. It's just that you're turning in the latest version of your budget, and you've just been kind of modifying as you go during the year. Okay, well, that was it. So if there's other, specific situations that you want to follow up with me, in the near future, please feel free. And otherwise, we can wrap it up. All right. Thank you for your time today. I really appreciate everyone joining us.